Welcome to the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service with me, Rachel Naylor. I'm going to take you back 85 years to when the ballpoint pen was invented. I've been speaking to the inventor's daughter.
Ideal for chewing, ideal for writing. It's a shaft of transparent plastic and with the characteristic chewable cap. Very, very, very few changes have been made to it. The only change which has occurred to it is for health and safety regulations. Originally the cap had a little point on it, but they recently had to cut it off, so if you should swallow the cap you can now breathe as well.
That was Stephen Bayling, the first CEO of the Design Museum in London, singing the praises of the humble biro to the BBC in 2005. Despite being invented in 1938, like he said, little has changed in its design since. And today, an estimated 15 million are sold every day around the world. But where did they come from? Our story starts in the 1930s, and we're in Budapest, in Hungary. Laszlo Biro is working as a reporter at the Allura newspaper, and he's sick of getting ink from his fountain pen on his hands.
Every time he tried to write down whatever was said to him, his pen would spot an ink and it gave him trouble, or he wouldn't write, or it would dry up. He saw how the newspapers printed. They had this roll, and the roll would roll on the paper, and the ink would flow, and the ink was absorbed by the paper, and it came out dry, and he said he wanted to reproduce that in a smaller size so as to be a pen, and then he realized that it could not be a roller, it had to be a ball.
That's Laszlo's daughter, Mariana, and the idea for the ballpoint pen, or biro as it's known in English-speaking countries, was born. When Laszlo wasn't reporting the news, he was always inventing.
His mind was always working on all kinds of different things. He was very observant, and he observed ants. He would wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Let's go down to the garden and watch the ants." It was interesting. I learned a lot.
What was he like as a dad?
Well, he's the only father I had. I can't compare him. He was extremely patient. He was interesting to listen to, and there was always something interesting we talked about. He would sometimes call me to his lab and says, "Look, I found this, or I saw this, or I worked on this. You want to see it? Are you interested?" And I would say, "Yes, let's see how it works." And he traveled a lot, and he was very busy, but I always knew I had a father that I could rely on 100%.
Like most inventions, the ballpoint pen involved a lot of trial and error.
They didn't work at the beginning, especially because during the war, the only factory that made tiny balls like that was a Swedish factory, and they made bullets, so the tiny little balls were not perfect.
Laszlo had to come up with a thicker ink that would not dry up inside a pen, but would dry quickly on paper. For this, he worked with his older brother George, a chemist. Eventually, after experimenting for 6 years, they cracked it, and he patented his prototype in 1938. Next, Laszlo needed others to recognise his great idea, and he was in luck. While he was on a beach on holiday in Rogaška Slatina, in what was then Yugoslavia, he met someone who loved his pen and would go on to change his life.
He was writing something with his pen, and the man came close to him. He says, "What are you writing with?" And he said, "Oh, this is something I invented and I'm experimenting with." Well, the man said, "How interesting. I live in Argentina, and here is my card, and if you are ever interested in coming to Argentina, I'll help you make it." So my father, thanked you, and put it in his pocket and never looked at it again. In the card it said, "Agustin Justo, president." So my father thought it was the president of a company.
But Laszlo was wrong. Agustin Justo was the president of Argentina. And so Laszlo accepted the invite to move to Argentina in 1940, and his family followed in 1941. But not everyone could come.
It's not easy to leave a country. I had $35, and I had to leave all $35 in Hungary. I could take one. So I took that baby, all the others that were grown-up dolls. I had to find families for them. So I gave them to different friends, but I gave them 2 or 3 so they would stay in a family. I remember that.
And once she arrived in Buenos Aires, Laszlo recruited 9-year-old Mariana into the family business to test the pens.
My father would give me a pen and say, you try and make circular movements in the pen and see if they lose ink or if they don't lose ink. Well, that was my first job. I had to discard the ones that didn't work. I would have a box of, let's say, 50 pens, and one by one I had to try them out. But I was very well paid because I was paid 50 cents an hour, and that was a lot of money.
And in the 1940s, thanks to Mariana's extensive testing, Laszlo's pens really took off, both in Argentina and abroad. But they weren't cheap.
We sold it in gimbals in New York. It was like a rare gift to give to someone. It wasn't a common thing. It was very expensive, so few people actually bought it.
They originally cost $12.50, which is about $210 in today's money. In 1945, French manufacturer Marcel Bic bought the patent, and Laszlo's pen soon became the main product of his company, Bic. Here's Stephen Bailey again.
What Monsieur Bic did with Barreau's invention was typically French. He turned it into a marvellous vernacular commodity. What was hitherto a luxury has become a commonplace. It is simply an efficient writing tool, economically available. It works flawlessly and perfectly. It's unimprovable. A perfect classic.
That same year, Laszlo also sold the rights to an English firm, the Miles Martin Aircraft Company, who produced 30,000 of them for the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, because it was the only pen which didn't leak at high altitudes. Laszlo, or Ladislao Biro, as he was known in Argentina, continued inventing and had 300 patents to his name when he died in 1985, aged 86.
He also invented a washing machine that worked with the energy of a cooking stove. And he invented the automatic shift for automobiles. General Motors bought it from him. If you ask an inventor which is his best invention, he will always tell you the next one.
Mariana went on to become a teacher. Inspired by her father, she even teaches invention at her school in Buenos Aires.
We don't expect them to have new inventions. We do it because we want them to learn that in life you have many problems and you have to solve them. It opens your mind. An inventor says, life is not always a success, so try again. And that's what we tell children.
The Bic Crystal Biro is now the world's most popular pen, and by 2006, Bic had sold more than 100 billion of them worldwide.
Hungary says that the invention is Hungarian. They're right. My father was Hungarian and the first patent is in Hungary. Argentines say the invention is Argentine because here in Argentina was the first time it was ever perfected, produced, and from here it went all over the world. So I always say that the Ballpoint pen has a Hungarian birth certificate and an Argentine passport. Recently I was in the United States and I bought 10 ballpoint pens for $1. So it's 10 cents for a pen. What more would you like? He always said that when the invention would be perfected, he wanted it to be in everybody's hand and all over the world. And actually, I'm very glad that he lived to see all that.
Mariana Biro was speaking to me, Rachel Naylor, for the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service. If you enjoyed listening, why not leave us a review? And please share it with anyone you think would like to hear it. It really helps in letting people know about the amazing stories people tell us on Witness History.